Hi folks, I want to just talk about memory and history, how it relates to history, and we're looking at a book by J.A. Robertson called Perspective, Meaning and Remembering. And we read from page 200. He says, "The focus on perspective places personal meaning at the centre of inquiry. Accuracy and completeness have been the conventional standards for assessing memory. In the world of cognitive research, the criteria for accuracy and completeness are usually defined from a third-person point of view. This investigator knows what really happened and can specify exactly how any person's account deviates from some canonical reality. But these discrepancies are neither absolute nor unambiguous. A third-person or observer perspective provides an indispensable information, and societies may decide that for a certain purpose it should be privileged, but it needs to be joined to a thorough analysis of first-person perspective. Accepting the need to include the personal in our science does not leave us stranded in relativism. We can objectify, characterize first-person perspectives as consistent or inconsistent with those of other participants and observers. Each person established ways of experiencing and their previous reports of events." So here I think this is a good intellectual foundation for looking at history, and in particular religious history such as the Gospels, and realizing that there's a task of a historian on two levels. One is that we write history as a general scientific point of view, but that we can look at the individual eyewitness material and accounts of people, and we can see that, if that's consistent with other accounts, that is viable part of the historical task of writing a general kind of more objective history. Hi folks, hope you're okay today. We're looking at J.A. Robertson's Perspective, Meaning and Remembering, and specifically reflecting how it relates to history and memory, or memory and history. In page 200 to 203 we read of his work. "The multiplicity of potential meanings. Some events are inherently ambiguous with respect, for example, to a person's motivation and innovation intentions, such that even third-person observers at the time must infer and interpret and may well do so differently. Deferred meaning. Meaning is not always fully explicated when events occur. Later information or insight may explicate previously puzzling events, or show that initial interpretation, though justified, was limited and should be expanded with additional meaning. Changing meaning. The meaning of any experience can change over time. New information or an altered perspective can prompt us to reinterpret specific experiences or entire segments of our personal history. Negotiating meaning. As we have already noticed, the social context of remembering can significantly shape the way remembered events are understood." Basically, when we're thinking about history and memory, memory is much more complex and intertextual than we give it credit. There's the social aspect of memory and how it relates to history. There's the psychological aspect of memory. There is the putting of meaning to memory, the choosing of memories. So a purely psychological analysis of memory does not do justice to when we look at memory and how we relate it to history. There's a very lot of complex questions that we have to ask as historians about memory. And so, for example, an example is, as we already noticed, the social context of remembering can significantly shape the way remembered events are understood. So a battle, a death of someone, and how people react to that will shape the memories of the people who see that event in a different way, say, than an event where it's a marriage of a king or something like that. You see what I'm getting at? Basically, history is very complex when we think about memory. and you can't come with trite attacks against the Christian faith and say, oh, it's Chinese whispers, the message Jesus was passed on, it got changed over time. No, no, no. Do you understand anything about memory and history and how complex memory is, especially when you start looking at the complexity of it and how it plays into historical inquiry in the 1st century? Hi folks, we're coming to just finish on history and memory, and this is a quote in F.C. Bartlett, quoted in J.A. Robinson's autobiographical memory, a historical prologue, page 23. We read, "The critical question remains, as they have been ever since remembering began to be investigated, how to understand and reconcile the conflicting demands for the accurate and literal restatement of events and experiences at the time when they go into storage, and the equality urgent requirement that when they come out of storage it should be in form sufficiently flexible to meet the challenges of constantly changing world." End of quote. And then we read, Ricoeur on memory, French philosopher. "In spite of the traps that imagination lays for memory, it can be affirmed that a specific search for truth is implied in the intending of past thing, of what was formerly seen, heard, experienced, learned. This search for truth determines memory as a cognitive issue." So, how do our motives relate to memory? If we've got a motive to want to preserve the history of a person, how will our motives influence the choosing of the memories that we have of that event? These are some of the questions that are interesting to ask as a historian when we're thinking about the life and times of Jesus Christ. Hi folks, hope you're okay. We're looking at the scholar Nineham, N-I-N-E-H-A-M, quote, Eyewitness Testimony and the Gospel Tradition, 1, page 713. And he says this: "According to the form critics, eyewitness played little direct part in the development of the gospel tradition, however much they may have had to do with its original formulation. The point is too well known to need elaboration, but it may be pointed out that this opinion is no accidental or peripheral feature of the form critical position, for it is of the essence of the form critical approach that it starts from the internal evidence of the Gospels in their finished form. The characteristic of the finished Gospels to which it points as they feature for their proper understanding are precisely those which are incompatible with any theory of much direct eyewitness influence after the initial stage. The formal stereotype of the separate section, suggestive of a long community use, the absence of particular individual details such as would be irrelevant to community of edification, the conventional character of the connecting summaries, all these point to a development which was controlled by the impersonal needs and forces of the community, and not immediately by the personal recollections of the individual eyewitness. Indeed, it would be too much to say that it is the absence of characteristics we should expect in eyewitness testimony, knowledge of the particular, inclusion of the merely memorable, as opposed to the edifying, exact biographical and topographical precision, and the like, which forms the very foundation of the form critical edifice. And so it is a basic article of belief of the form critic that the gospel tradition owed the form in which it reached our evangelist almost entirely to community and its demands, and hardly at all to direct intervention or modification on the part of the eyewitnesses. So what we've been looking at is memory, and memory suggests individual people giving their information about a particular event. But for many years, for like 60 years, there's been the form critics have said no, it's about community. Community shaped the gospel material. But what Nineham is saying, what scholars are saying, such as Balcombe, as opposed to, is that actually that's not true. There were key individuals within the Christian community who were eyewitnesses, and their eyewitnesses played a fundamental role in shaping the material that was written down. But that's an earth-shattering proposition. It's an earth-shattering proposition. Because if it is true, it means the Gospels are based on eyewitness material, and not just legendary embellishments by communities of generations later.